The Copenhagen Climate Conference is the biggest environmental meeting in more than a decade. Environmentalists from all over the world are planning for urgent action to be taken against global warming. And joining me to help talk about this conference is Senator Jim Inhofe. Senator, thanks so much for joining me.
Nice to be with you.
So I know you're going to Copenhagen, and your views are a little bit different than a lot of the other people that are going over there. Why are you going to Copenhagen?
Oh, I'm going, I actually went to one of these before in 2003 in Milan, Italy. I'm going over because I fear that if some of the individuals like Senator Boxer or Senator Kerry go over and they say what we are going to do in the United States, I have a feeling it's going to be something we're not going to do. Then, of course, with the President going over and saying we're hereby committed to a 17% reduction in emissions by 2020, I have to say, no, that isn't true. America is not going to do that. I think it'd be unfair for 192 countries to go back home thinking that America is going to do something that we're not going to do.
And what specifically do you think is wrong with the agenda at Copenhagen?
Well, the agenda is they have all people who think alike, and many of the people representing countries really don't care about the agenda. It's the biggest party of the year. Right now, the biggest problem is they're running out of caviar and champagne. So in a lot of these countries, that's the only reason they're going, just for the party. The agenda there is to try to put together, something, some accord that everyone could agree with. That isn't going to happen now because it's a foregone conclusion that that will be a failure in Copenhagen. So now they're going to try to plan for something for 2010 in Mexico City.
And I want to ask you about the ClimateGate scandal. It's been called the biggest scientific scandal of our generation. What was your reaction to it? Well,
I'm glad that was, you're quoting the UK Telegraph. And that's an accurate, and I could quote many others too. Well, here's what I think about it. I gave a speech 4 years ago on the Senate floor because all the scientists had come to me and said, you know, they won't air our side of the view. The whole thing is cooked. And so I gave a speech on the floor outlining what they were doing to manipulate all the data that they're basing this on and how they're hiding this stuff from other scientists. And sure enough, when ClimateGate came, those emails said exactly what I predicted 4 years ago on the Senate floor. So I think it's a scandal. It's a scandal, the dimensions I've never seen, I guess, in my lifetime, that they would do this. And now they're going to try to base policies in the United States on the IPCC science that has been debunked already. So we're going to fight the battle here.
Well, what do you think about, Al Gore basically dismissed these emails. He said they were taken out of context. It happened more than 10 years ago. What do you think about that?
Well, Al Gore, keep in mind, Al Gore is the big winner on this. And he has actually made hundreds of millions of dollars on this scam. And, of course, he has to say that. There wouldn't be any, and he's not exactly after having made, it's something close to $1 billion, I understand. And after that, you don't expect him to come along and say, oh, well, it's all over now because of, so I would expect that. And there are a lot of people trying to play it down. I would say this, the Guardian, which is an environmental activist group, said pretending this is not a real crisis isn't going to make it go away. And the Atlantic Monthly, the stink of intellectual corruption is overpowering. This is really a scandal. And it's kind of ironic that it came out when it did, because now people realize. And there's so many people who are well-meaning people for 15 years have talked about this, and now they realize that the science was cooked.
Well, maybe it proves that the science was cooked and maybe that the scientists themselves were unethical, but does it prove that global warming isn't true?
Well, if the global warming is consensus, as they call it, is based on the IPCC science, then yes, you'd certainly have to question that. I've always said that there is a relationship between man-made gases, CO2, and the weather, not necessarily whatever word you want to use for it, global warming. But it's so small, it's hardly measurable. In fact, it was Al Gore's scientist, Tom Wigley, who said if all nations did this restriction, it would only, all developed nations, it would only reduce the temperature by 7/100ths of 1 degree Celsius. Now, what that's not even measurable. So since this is something that would cost the American people between $300 and $400 billion a year, and not to get any results, I cannot conscientiously support it. And there are more and more senators who feel the same way. Many Democrat senators now have joined on, so there's just not the support in America to pass something.
And so what's the motivation behind all of this? I mean, why are the scientists doing this? Why are the politicians, as you say, cooking the science then? What's their motivation?
Well, I've always thought a lot of it had to do with, see, this all started with the United Nations. It was certainly a lot of people in the United Nations don't like to be accountable to any countries. Perhaps that had something to do with it. Then you have the far left, the extremists, the MoveOn.org, the George Soros, the Michael Moore. These are that's where all the money is. And this is what I call the Hollywood elites. And those people out there are very, very liberal, and they're famous for trying to manage everybody else's life except their own.
And so how will this affect the average American, out on Main Street? Obama has said that the greenhouse gases are going to really affect everyone's health. How is this going to affect the average American in terms of taxes and jobs and things like that?
Well, it's not going to affect them because we're not going to pass it.
But if it passes?
If it did, it would cost the American people somewhere between $300 and $400 billion a year. Now, that translates to, in my state of Oklahoma, for example, well over $3,000 a tax-paying family in my state of Oklahoma, and you don't get anything for it. In fact, Lisa Jackson, who is the director of the Environmental Protection Agency, even admitted that if we had passed either the Waxman-Markey bill, or the Boxer bill, it wouldn't reduce the greenhouse gas emissions at all.
And President Obama has said that he wants to reduce carbon dioxide emissions by 17% by 2020, and a lot of his proponents are saying, that's great. Why wouldn't we want to breathe cleaner air and, drink nice water? I mean, what do you think about
Well, first of all, it is highly controversial that this would perform, that CO2 is the danger that people would like to have you believe it is. To link it with the 5 pollutants that really are pollutants is wrong. And if we were to do that and have policy on, change our policy in the United States, as I say, it'd be the largest tax increase in history, and you don't get anything for it.
And one thing I want to go back to really quickly is I know you've talked about how this could ultimately outsource jobs to places like India and China because there aren't restrictions over there. Can you explain that to me a little bit?
Oh, well, because even though they're saying that, oh, well, someday we'll restrict our CO2, they're not going to do it. In fact, they laugh at us and think, yeah, they would love to have the United States of America pass something over here so that when we can't generate electricity here, our jobs would go to China and to India and to Mexico, into the developing world. And they would love to have our jobs there. I mean, China is cranking out almost 3 coal-fired generating plants each week. And that shows you that they have no intention of reducing their CO2.
And so who in the United States would benefit from reducing the CO2?
Well, nobody would. It would just be, if we passed something that would have mandatory reduction, it would be very punitive to our taxpayers. And,
I want to go back to ClimateGate for a second. We talked a little bit about the IPCC from the UN. Do you think they have a monopoly on the scientific information that people are receiving? And, I mean, how is that happening?
Well, yeah, the IPCC is the group of the United Nations that was kind of self-appointed to do this, to run this show. This is over 10 years ago. And they are the ones who, as the scientists, there's a group of scientists that make recommendations and do evaluations. Then they now go through and eliminate anything that doesn't support their view. So that's just the science. That is the science behind it. And by the way, that is not just me saying it. Everyone agrees with that. That is not a disputable point. Even Lisa Jackson, our administrator of the EPA, has said that it's that science that we relied our policies on.
Do you think or hope that this ClimateGate scandal is going to change the way science is being done around the world?
I hope it does. I hope it does because, I've talked to so many scientists that they just can't believe that this has been happening over the last 10 years. And we should rely on sound science. Everybody says that, but they don't want to do it. In fact, that's something that Barack Obama during his campaign said, We need to have reliable science. And then he embraces this drummed up science.
And you've been called one of the most prominent global warming skeptics in this country. And I heard that when you were in Milan, there were people holding your sign up in protest. What do you think about that?
Well, that's fine. You know, they're fed this stuff by the media, and a lot of them believe it. In fact, they had my picture on telephone poles, wanted pictures. And that's fine. You know, I've learned a long time ago that if you don't have the truth on your side, you don't have the science on your side, all you can do is call names. And that's what they've been doing for several years now.
Well, Senator, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today.
Nice to have you here.